don't know. And Whitney and Jamie left. Did you invite one of them? Care, she honestly wasn't here that long. No. No, Tux it stands for the Utah experience.
She was the team.
Mm-hmm. She joined under the brokerage. So, and she's doing, I think if she would have hung on, she was just
Getting there.
She was just about there. And then once she left, it all of a sudden happened, and she's been doing incredibly well. And I think maybe it was the perfect move for her, you know. I mean,
Just different times,
Cole-
you need different.
Cole just went with, you know, Cole that was here in the office. He just went with Walker Homes.
You would.
Mhm. Well, it's steady for sure. And then depending on the builder, they allow you to do sort of transactions of your own on the side. So. Colt, it's Colt actually, COLT. It's not that way.
Are we all ready?
Yes.
We ready to do this? How are we feeling about this?
Cole Johnson.
Are we feeling good? We feeling nervous? We feeling anxious?
All
How are we feeling? All of those things? Well, you're not alone. Well, when does it start? When do we have to? 13th, yeah. So on the 13th, all of the offers for compensation are going to come off the MLS. So if you're under contract on a property, print off a copy of the MLS before then, so that you have that record of what the listing agent.
What if it's built? You know, like I tried to look it up to print it off,
Mhm.
but it's not there.
It's in the contract.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
your
it'll be
commission
okay.
is in the contract.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one thing that's nice about new construction is that often they're not on the MLS. And so in the contract, there's an agency section, and it talks about who's representing the builder, who's representing the buyer, who's being compensated what. So that should already be in the contract. If it's not, then I would use the compensation agreement that we're going to talk about today to define that. Okay. So when Craig was here, well, we got through the buyer addendum, I think maybe.
Yeah.
Is about all we got through. We really didn't get through the documents. So today I want to start with the rep sheet. So the first sheet you have here is what's being proposed to take place or to be displayed in the new rep sheet. So what they're proposing, and this is subject to the Attorney General's approval. So there's two different entities that have to approve all of these changes. Here in the state of Utah, it is the Attorney General's office. And it also has to be approved by the DOJ, Department of Justice. That's a federal department. These other documents have been approved, and so they've been released. Actually, as of Wednesday, you can now find all of these documents on the multiple listing service, with the exception of the Rep C. Rep C has not been put on the MLS yet because it has not been approved by the Attorney General's office. But here is an example of what has been proposed to the Attorney General's office. So in section 4.3 of the current Rep C, we talk about fees, costs, and payment obligations. This is mainly talking about HOA, who's paying the HOA fees, who's paying any assessments that have been assessed to the property. And so this was a logical place for the commission or compensation to be added, because we're talking about who's paying what, buyer paying it, seller paying it, are they splitting it 50-50? So this is the proposed change to this section is there's a section 4.3E right after utilities. It's called real estate brokerage compensation. So let's read this. Seller's contribution to buyer's brokerage. Seller and buyer agree that seller shall contribute blank % of the purchase price to the buyer's brokerage, or blank dollars. So you have to check a box. I want to point this out, is that there's a checkbox. There's a checkbox here for a percentage. There's a checkbox here for a flat fee. If applicable, the payment shall be made in addition to any other compensation agreed to by the seller's brokerage and buyer's brokerage. Okay. If no box is checked, the seller has not agreed to compensate the buyer's brokerage in the Rep C. So if you don't check a box, there's no compensation. So make sure that you check the appropriate box. Buyer and seller mutually agree that buyer's brokerage is a third party beneficiary to the Rep C with equal rights as buyer to enforce provisions in section 4.3E only. Okay, so they're giving the buyer's brokerage authority to enforce this provision. Okay. Buyer agrees that seller's payment to buyer's brokerage does not exceed the amount agreed to between buyer and buyer's brokerage in their buyer broker agreement. Very, very important. So there's two things that are key in this settlement. Number one is that you need to have a buyer broker agreement signed with a buyer before you can show a property, before you can open a door. Is everybody clear on that? Okay. Some brokerages have come up with what they call a showing agreement, but I don't understand the showing agreement. If you guys do, help me out. But because really, we're about agency. As realtors, we have to have agency in order to be able to represent a client. And so the showing agreement just delays the process of getting agency with the client. Okay. So, and there's a lot of flexibility in the buyer broker agreement. You can do that buyer broker agreement for one party. I mean, one address, just that address. You can do it for a county. You can do it for one day if you want to do it for one day. So there's no reason why a buyer wouldn't sign a buyer broker agreement, because you can tailor it to what they say. What's the common concern of a buyer? They don't want to be locked in. I don't know if I like you. I don't know if I want to work with you yet. Okay. Well, you know what? Me as an agent, I don't know if I want to work with you either yet. So it's kind of nice to be able to have a little bit of flexibility. So that's why you can do it for one day, one property. So there's a lot of flexibility there. Okay. The other thing is that you cannot receive compensation greater than what's on the buyer broker agreement. Okay. So if you agree to represent them for 2% and the seller is offering 3%, you're not getting the 3%, you're getting the 2%.
So using your example of the 3% and 2%, if the buyer agent agree with his buyer just to charge 2%, seller is offering 3%. So the seller, listing agent is charging 3%, he's already cleared that, right? So technically, the seller is saving 1%. That's go back to the seller.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about the compensation agreement. Because there's some fiduciary issues with that, in my opinion. Now, Sean hasn't been here this week. He's been on vacation. Good for him. He's the principal broker of the company, and he is the one that's going to determine how we work through this. So I'm just going to say, as a disclaimer today, I'm not the principal broker. I'm not telling you the company's policy because I'm not the principal broker, but I'm telling you what I believe is the best practice for us as a brokerage and for you as an agent. The last 2 weeks, I've been on a broker call with all of the brokers in KW in the state of Utah, and we've talked about that at length. And there's a lot of consensus as to how we think this is going to roll out. And I'm going to talk about probably 3 different ways this is going to roll out. And very honestly, I think you need to choose how you want to roll this out based on your business plan. Okay. So let's go ahead and finish this. So you're not going to get any more than what you have in your buyer broker agreement. The question always comes up, well, can't I amend my buyer broker agreement? There is an addendum to the buyer broker agreement. Technically, yes, you could, but I don't know as if I would be that guy. And I don't know as if the DOJ would take favor to that. Okay. So in other words, you say you're going to do it for 2. The listing agent sends over a buyer broker commission agreement for 3. And then you say to your buyer, well, hey, they're paying 3%. So I want to raise my commission to 3%. So that becomes an issue. Okay.
Don't you think it would be favorable though if we amended that to be lower? So if we take the buyer at 3 or 3.5, whatever people are doing, and okay, so this house is only offering 2.5.
Yeah.
I personally, in 12 years, have never once gone back to my buyer and said, you know, the seller's only paying this.
Yeah.
It's that discussion with your buyer of they're only offering this, instead of trying to go back and renegotiate that.
Yeah.
You know, I'm reducing.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that? And at what point are we required to do that? Is it when we write the offer? Because you and I both know not all offers work out.
Yeah. So this is how I would do it. I would always take my buyer broker agreement at 3%. I would not use the terminology that I want a full commission, because a full commission, that terminology indicates what?
There's a set standard.
That there's a set standard. There is not a set standard. Okay. Is there something that's usual and customary? Yeah, perhaps. But I think you need to make it about you. You need to say my fee, my compensation for my work, for my expertise, for my time is 3%. Okay. So I would take my buyer broker agreements at 3%, but I'd also say to them, if this is your business plan, it may not be your business plan. It personally is my business plan. That in the event that the seller offers less than 3%, I'm open to taking a look at that and reducing the amount. Okay. So in the 33 years I've been in the business, I have never made the transaction about commission. I want the person to get the house, and I don't want them to feel like they're being nickel and dimed by me as the agent. Now, there are some exceptions, as we know, with other discount brokerages. Some of them are offering $1 buyer broker commission or $100 buyer broker commission. That's another story, right? Then we would have to have a discussion about that. So the way I say is that as long as they're going to pay a 2% commission, I'm okay with that. If it's less than 2%, then we need to have a conversation about compensation. So yeah, I'm with you. Put it at 3%. The DOJ will look favorably on you reducing that, but trying to increase that, it's not good. It's not good for you politically. with your client in the industry, and it's not good with the DOJ.
So two things with that, you guys show your value.
Yeah.
Show your value and like, there's no reason to take a buyer 2%.
Yeah.
You have more value.
That's what this all boils down to, is being able to articulate your value proposition.
Absolutely. And then at what point, if that happens, do we need to make that addendum?
So that question came up as well, and people are really anxious about this. And the gal said, well, hey, what if I do a 3% and then we make an offer and that property's at 2.5 and that doesn't work out, and then we find another property and that's at 2%. Do I have to keep doing all these addendums? You know, I'm gonna have 8 addendums to my buyer broker agreement for all of these different commissions based on where we ultimately end up with the buyer's commission. My answer is pump the brakes on that. Okay, until you go under contract on a property, then do an addendum. Okay, let's not be anxious about this and feel like we need to have everything aligned at the time that we write an offer. We don't have a deal at that point, right? So let's pump the brakes on that until we go under contract. And then at that point, you can do an addendum to the buyer broker agreement, matching what the compensation for that particular property is going to be. Does that make sense?
So I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So technically, the buyer agent is filling this out, the reps, right? You send an offer.
Mhm.
And the section 4.3, that is where he gonna fill out this.
Yes.
So let's say that he wants the 3%, right?
Mhm.
He's gonna write down 3% here.
Mhm.
At this point, I'm assuming that he called the listing agent,
Maybe,
asking how much the seller is offering.
maybe,
Right.
maybe.
Okay,
This
so
is one of the scenarios, so we'll
Yeah.
talk about that.
he sent this offer, I received this offer.
Mhm.
I already know the seller is offering on 2.5.
Mhm.
So what happened here is that, how I see it, is the agent is limiting the offer against, I will say, buyer best interest. Because it's another offer, if I receive another offer
Mhm.
versus this one with 2% only,
Yeah,
my seller will run for that other offer. He's not even gonna counter this offer.
right.
So, and that is what I'm saying. So if I call the listing agent, this is me.
Yep.
If I call the listing agent and say, hey, how much commission are you guys offering?
Yep.
He said, 2.5, Oscar.
Yeah.
Awesome, okay. And I have an agreement with my buyer with 3%, right? So we talk about that. How do you guys feel about this?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Oscar, let's send that. I will take care of the other 3. Let's try to negotiate the other half, right?
Uh-huh.
We can do that. But I already know that 2.5 is what they're offering and that we can lower this to 2.5. So it's based, I think, in the negotiation skill of the 2 agents to not let this deal die only because there is no communication.
Yeah, yeah. And very honestly, a lot of the questions and concerns that agents are bringing up are about communication. The thing is, oh my gosh, I gotta call every listing agent that I'm showing the property to find out what the compensation is. Yeah. Yeah, you are. You're gonna have to call them, you're gonna have to text them. We have to communicate. Oh my gosh.
You know, I always, before all this, if I gonna go and show a property to my client,
Yeah,
I already talked to the agent. Either way, I call him, ask questions, blah, 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 because when I show up, I wanna be knowledgeable.
right.
I want to explain my client the details, what's going on with the house, you like it, we can negotiate.
Yeah,
And I'm gonna go and show a house blind.
yeah. You're the exception, Oscar. Honestly, you're the exception. The average agent doesn't do that. The average agent makes their appointment on a line. They don't talk to the listing agent. They go show the house. If the buyer's interested in the property, then they reach out to the listing agent and say, hey, I'm going to send you an offer. And they notify them that they're going to send them an offer. But is that in your buyer's best interest to do it that way? No, the way that in your buyer's best interest is to do it the way that you're doing it. And that's to call the listing agent and say, and in this case, say, hey, is your seller offering compensation to a buyer's agent? Yes or no? Okay, yes, they are. Okay, how much are they offering in compensation? So the listing agent has two choices. They can give that to you verbally or in a text message, say they're offering 3%. Or what some listing agents are going to do is at the time that they have their seller sign the ERS, they're also going to have them sign the document in here called the compensation agreement. And in the compensation agreement, we'll talk about that one in a second. It says how much the listing agent is being paid and how much the buyer's agent is being paid. The seller signs it, the listing agent signs it. That gets sent over to the buyer's agent, and there's a place for the buyer's agent and the buyer to sign it. Okay, so all four parties sign this agreement. That's a legally binding contract between all parties. That is not changeable. At this date, today, as I talk to you, that compensation agreement is not changeable. So if your seller says that they're going to pay a 3% commission and they sign that document and you send that over to the buyer's agent, that's what your seller is obligated to pay them. Okay.
So that will be included in the reps, that form.
So that's how some agents are going to do it. Some agents are going to send that over to you. When you call them and say, hey, I'm writing an offer on your property, what's the compensation? And they say it's 3%, and I'll send you over my compensation agreement. There's what their client is going to pay, and that's a contract.
So I have, okay, so there's a bunch of agents that they just go shopping around or really shopping. So I think if I'm gonna send that form, it will be for that serious agent buyer that really pull the trigger on the house.
Yeah.
So, but if we send that form, that means that the buyer agent already agree. So they're gonna fill out this based on that other form as well.
Well, no, because what's on your buyer broker agreement? If you have 2.5% on your buyer broker agreement, that's all you can collect is 2.5%. Even though the seller is offering 3%.
Oh, yeah, okay.
You can't be paid more. That's what we're saying is put 3% on your agreements. You can always go down. You can't go up. Okay. I personally, you know, this is me speaking. This is me speaking, my philosophy. It's not the company's philosophy. I don't like the idea of the seller sending over the compensation agreement in writing to the buyer's agent. Okay. The reason being is that if your seller is offering a 3% commission and the buyer's agent is only saying that they'll represent the buyer for 2%, there's a percent on the table that's not being used. Okay. Because you can't go up to 3%. So you're going to get 2%, but yet I've communicated as the listing agent to the buyer's agent that my client's willing to pay 3%. So now what's going to happen? What's a buyer's agent and buyer thinking? Yeah, they're thinking, hey, there's an extra percent there. I can't pay it in commission. I can't take it in commission. But now, Mr. Buyer, I'm going to get you another percent in concessions because they've already agreed to pay that. So is that in your client's fiduciary? Are you being a fiduciary to your client by sharing that? I personally think it's a little problematic. So here's what I recommend that you do. And this is just me speaking, is that the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to take the listing. I'm going to have my client sign the compensation agreement, so it's in writing, but I'm not going to share that with the buyer's agent. When a buyer's agent calls me and says, hey, Ken, I showed your property on 1234 South Street, and my buyer's really interested. We're going to be writing you an offer. Is your seller paying compensation? And my answer is yes. My client is paying compensation. And they say, how much? And I say, tell you what, I know you have a buyer broker agreement with your buyer. Why don't you put your compensation that you have in your buyer broker agreement in section 4.3 of the contract?
That's it.
Done. Then they write the contract, send it over to us, and if it's 2 or 2.5%. My client saves the money.
And so what are you gonna do when they press for that? Because I know how. I think people are gonna press for that. Well,
Yeah.
then, what is the amount?
Yeah, they can. They
And
can.
so are you saying you're not gonna share that?
If they press me, I will.
Okay.
But my original position is, yeah, they're offering compensation. So put it in the contract, because then it's disclosed to everybody. I can't pay you more than what's in your buyer broker agreement. So send that over and we'll pay you what your buyer broker agreement says.
If I request 3% or let you know,
Yeah.
I'm to 3%, you send me the counter offer, hey, I will pay
Yeah.
2.5.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I like, there's 3 ways how to do it, right? Okay, I like the other one, the broker to broker. I like that approach better. For me.
Yeah.
Because I can negotiate that with my client right away, right there, and then broker to broker.
Yeah.
We can fight whatever. But we don't wanna put buyers and sellers
Right.
right there. So I think in my script, I will include that approach, why we can use this instead of the other two. So explain us a little bit about broker to broker thing versus this, the way how you.
Yeah. So let's talk about the 3 ways a buyer and buyer's agent's gonna approach the commission. One way, and I don't recommend this way, and I think this is really a weak way for a buyer and a buyer's agent to approach this situation, is that the buyer's agent makes no contact with the listing agent about compensation. They show the property, and their philosophy is, hey, I'm just gonna ask for whatever. I'm gonna ask for 3% or 2.5%, whatever's in my buyer broker agreement in the rep C, and I'm just gonna send that over without talking to anybody. I think you're gonna see that as a listing agent. I think you're gonna get offers come to you where there has been no discussion with you about compensation. And so there's that way. That's how some agents are gonna handle it, because they don't want to communicate with the listing agent, and they're just gonna kind of say, they're gonna do a Hail Mary. I'm gonna send this over and I'm gonna hope for the best without talking about compensation. If this is unacceptable to the seller, then what's gonna happen in the offer process? There's gonna be a counter offer, okay? So they're gonna counter offer the compensation in section 4.3.
You know, Ken, the thing is, if we add, for example, me as a buyer agent, if I add 3% right there, plus I'm requesting concession. And then repairs, and then whatever other things. That's a lot of money.
Mhm.
That can kill the deal right there. If I receive that and I show my client that and I say, well, my client will say, this is garbage. I will not pay all this money. So for me, I think just to send an offer, at least to be, sorry for the expression, sexy to the seller.
Mhm.
I need to talk to the listing agent, or at least we can work it out that way, so my offer will not be that ugly.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%. The way you should do it is that when you schedule a showing, you should call the listing agent and ask them, hey, I'm showing your property. Is your seller offering compensation? Yes or no? Yes, okay, how much is your seller offering compensation? 2.5%. Okay, great. Thanks. Do you have a compensation agreement that you can send over to me to that effect? Send over the compensation agreement, okay? Then you know that you're getting paid 2.5%, okay? Put the 2.5% in the rep C and you're done.
So in the, with the listing agent and seller, they can agree, let's say, they can go lower, but they can go up, right?
Yep, yep.
Okay, so let's say that strategy, you say, hey, we can go up, but let's start lower. Let's put it 2%. Because the other agent, I know that he will want me, right?
Yeah.
So. And I'm assuming that the buyer agent is requesting, is okay to go maybe 2.5, that's kind of, or 3%. So that's kind of like strategies, that is what I'm saying. The strategies between listing agent and buyer agent. How that's gonna make it work, because my job is to negotiate. For my seller to make more money.
Yeah.
Right. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's fine, and I think that's already happening today. That's no different than what's happening in today's market. There's a certain percentage of agents that will not represent the client for less than 3%.
Mhm.
So even though the seller is offering 2 or 2.5, the buyer's agent is already negotiating a 3% commission. A lot of our agents in this brokerage don't work for less than 3%. So that's already happening. It is a package. The compensation, the concessions, and the sales price are a package. And then the seller has to decide which package is most attractive to them if they're contemplating multiple offers. So I think that's already happening. But yes, does the seller look at their net? Absolutely.
See, the thing is that the seller was blind to that side of the way how we were doing it, right? Somehow. But right now, he's gonna see all these numbers, all this concession, all this money going away from his net. That is kind of like.
Well, that's one reason why I don't like the compensation agreement being sent over prior to an offer, is because here's what's troubling for me as a listing agent is I negotiate hard, and I negotiate a 3% commission for me and for the buyer. And then so we've got a 6% deal. And the buyer's agent calls me and says, hey, I'm gonna send over an offer. I send over the compensation agreement for 3%. He sends me an offer for $50,000 less than the asking price, $20,000 in concessions, sends me over a low offer. Is my seller gonna want to pay the 3% commission
No.
for an offer like that?
No.
Is he now legally obligated to do that? Yes, because it shows up in the compensation agreement. That's a legally binding document. So the buyer's agent, even though he sends a crappy offer, is going to get a 3% commission as long as he's put a 3% commission in his buyer broker agreement. So you can't use commission. It takes commission out of it, which is actually a good thing. This discussion cuts both ways. I'm just being honest with you. This discussion cuts both ways, because the compensation agreement fixes the commission. That's not negotiable now, because that's a legally binding document. So the buyer's agent is going to get 3% as long as his buyer broker agreement says that he gets paid 3%, even though we have a crappy offer. Okay. Now, the seller can't use commission as a weapon against the buyer and buyer's agent. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a good thing. It's a good thing. So that's why I'm saying this cuts both ways. That's why you have to decide as an agent is how you want to manage this in your business plan. Because now the seller can't say, hey, I'm going to accept this crappy offer, but I don't want to pay a 3% commission, because he's locked into paying a 3% commission. What the seller can do is the seller can what? Raise the price, okay? Counter offer and raise the price, or reduce the concessions. So those two options are still on the table as far as structuring a crappy offer to where it works for both parties, but the commission is off the table. Whereas if you don't send over the compensation agreement until you're under contract, then the commission is still negotiable. Okay, up to the level that the buyer has in the buyer broker.
And also the commission they can get from the concession, the 20,000 they asking for the concession. They can take it from there.
It could be, depending on how it's, yeah.
Yeah. I think the more important thing right now is to explain the customer how it is the play right now when you're going to do the negotiation. And then you be very realistic.
Yeah.
How is the business right now? I have still under contract with Lennar. They having the flat fee, and they're giving me $8,000. And then I negotiate the concession, more high I can get, and then I put my other portion of my commission there. And my client, they ask, okay, Francis, you can do that, thank you. for-"
That's
Yeah.
that's the way to do it.
It's
too.
how play around with the other agent and then, be nice, the relationship, you call them and they try back and forth and do the best deal you can find.
Because if the buyer's gonna end up paying the difference on the BAC, that is gonna be a
Yeah,
closing
they-
cost to them. So if you do have the seller paying concessions, that could potentially be covered by the concessions. Does that make sense? Everybody's clear on that? If the buyer ends up paying the difference, it is a closing cost to the buyer. And if the seller's paying closing costs up to a certain limit, that could be covered. Okay.
Yeah,
as part of
everything,
it. Yeah.
everything is covered, the closing, the other portion of my commission, everything is
Yeah.
covered with the concession already. Get from the, like, from the seller.
Yeah, so that's
That's
another
how I
way,
try to work right now before this.
that's another way that can be
And
handled.
it's good.
So let me tell you how I think these offers are gonna come across to you guys as listing agents, okay? We already talked about the first one, and that is that the buyer's agent has no communication with the listing agent, shows the property, and just puts their commission in the purchase contract and hopes that that gets accepted, okay? I don't recommend that. That's not a best practice, but I'm just being honest with you. Agents are lazy.
Mhm.
They take the path of least resistance, and that's the path of least resistance, is just to do a Hail Mary. I'm gonna put it in the contract, and whatever they pay, they pay. Okay? The second way that I think this is gonna go down is that, and this is one of the acceptable ways for this to happen, is that the buyer's agent contacts the listing agent at the time that they're gonna show the property and says, hey, I've made an appointment, or I'm making an appointment to show your property on Elm Street, and I'm just wondering, is your seller offering compensation? And the listing agent says, yes, we're paying compensation. He says, yes, we're paying 2.5% compensation on that deal. So now the buyer knows everything that they need to know in order to write an offer. They know that, yes, the seller's paying compensation and they're paying 2.5%. So they put 2.5% in section 4.3 of the REPC, send that over, and you have acceptance. Okay, because you've called the seller and you have a meeting of mind on the compensation. Okay, let's say though that your buyer broker agreement is only 2% and they're offering 2.5%. That leaves your buyer owing, just the opposite. Let's say that they're offering 2%, you got 2.5% in your buyer broker agreement. So now your seller is obligated to that extra 0.5%. Okay, so you do like you said, where if the seller is paying closing costs, that's going to be a cost that's going to be passed on to the buyer. In the negotiating process with the seller in the contract, as things ebb and flow with purchase price, concessions, commission is now part of the contract. So that is also open for discussion in the contract. Does that make sense? Up to the buyer broker amount. Okay, because it's now part of the REPC. So that's the second way that I think you're gonna have people approach you as the listing agent about putting a deal together, is that they're not gonna ask for the commission compensation agreement, nor are you gonna offer it. It's just gonna be verbal. Okay, it's gonna be a phone call, text message, whatever, and you guys work it out. The third way, which a lot of brokers are considering to be best practice, is that, like I said, the listing agent takes the ERS, has them fill out the compensation agreement at the time that they fill out the ERS, and that compensation agreement is sent over to the buyer's agent when they tell them that they're going to write an offer. That's signed by the buyer, signed by the buyer's agent. That now becomes a contract for compensation between all parties. And that becomes the governing document in the transaction.
By the buyer's agent or by
The buyer's agent and the buyer sign it. All four parties sign that agreement. That's what makes it legal and binding.
So you're saying the real estate brokerage compensation agreement, so having that filled out when we,
take the listing, when you do your ERS, and then you send that over to the buyer's agent when they say that they're gonna be writing an offer. And then that way, there's an official confirmation, an official agreement as to compensation.
At that point, you can't really negotiate it. It's always-
Yeah.
you can
That's
always
the word.
negotiate it, but
That can't be changed. The compensation agreement right now today can't be modified.
it does not have.
I talked to Craig when he was here and said, hey. Is there any talk about doing an addendum to the compensation agreement that allows that document to be modified? And he said, there has been a lot of pushback on that, so we're thinking about creating an addendum to that document, so it could be modified.
Yeah.
So in the event, example, you've negotiated 3% commission, buyer calls you and says, hey, I've showed your property, I want to write an offer on your property. What's the compensation? Are they offering compensation? Yes. What are they offering? 3%. My buyer broker agreement is only for 2.5%. Great. I'm going to send you over a compensation agreement with an addendum, making it 2.5%. Then that way they both match. That makes sense. Because then your seller's not leaving that 0.5% potentially on the table. You're modifying that agreement with an addendum.
Could another strategy and let, until there is an addendum, as a listing agent, immediately want to send that, especially if your seller's only offering 2.5, so that the buyer's agent in a way is locked into that 2.5 instead of requesting for the 3%?
You can't request 3%, you can't go up. But what they're gonna do, you came in late, we'd already talked about that, but no, you're fine. But what they can do is the agent sees there's a 0.5% there. So then that ends up being asked for as a price reduction or additional concession. They know that money's on the table. It can't be in commission because you can't go above your buyer broker agreement, but a smart agent's gonna say, hey, there's a 0.5% there, the seller's agreed to pay. Let's use that as concessions, or let's take a 0.5% off the purchase price. Because they've offered that, that's on the table.
So that document, the compensation that you said that we can send to the buyer. They can sign. How about if we receive an offer? As soon as we received it,
Uh-huh.
I send them that one,
That I think that's a better way to do it.
because I already know there's an offer, I email, is serious, okay, here you back, thank you so much.
And you already know what the compensation is too.
Uh-huh,
Yeah.
so I send that to him.
Yeah.
And we sign it, we already agree with the company.
That's how I prefer that you do it personally. Now, I'm not speaking on behalf of the company, and I wish Sean was here and he could give us the official position of the company. But to me, that's the way to do that, is to get the offer and then send the compensation agreement that matches the offer so that your seller's not leaving money on the table. I see the other way as your seller potentially leaving money on the table. Okay, that's just me. I think that money's gonna be used somewhere. Can't be used in commission, but it's gonna be used somewhere else.
How about times you said that you would call the listing agent when you're showing the property,
Yeah.
the same event? So at that point, you're asking at that point, and even if you just get a yes, and then you're doing this with the offer.
Yeah.
Right?
I'd ask
But
how
you're
much. to-
calling, so instead of just scheduling and showing and doing the back, like I showed your property, this was the process, you're calling beforehand too.
Yeah.
On every property you show.
Yeah, I think you should. I think that's in your buyer's best interest. I hope you guys do that. What I do is I call the listing agent. Sometimes they'll answer, sometimes they don't. If they don't answer, I text them. People are a lot better about texting than they are answering their phone, but I think that's gotta change. It's gotta change. We've gotta have a discussion with people about compensation. Is it being offered? How much is being offered? The other thing I want to ask the listing agent is, what's important to your seller? Is it money? Is it timing? Do they need a lease back?
See, and I've just been, on the back end, like you found one because you're seeing some properties and some of them are just not good matches. When you find a good match, and before I write the offer, I've been
Yeah.
calling them and then at that point saying, I think we're interested, is there something that's,
Right. But now you've got to do it on the
so
front
now you're
end,
saying,
because now you got to address compensation. You didn't have to address compensation before, so you could do it on the back end. But I wanted to go to the property because my client's interested. I want to have an intelligent discussion with them at the property or after I showed them the property saying, hey, here's what's important to the seller. I called the seller's agent and they said that timing's important to them. They got to be in Miami in 3 weeks. So they want us to close in 3 weeks, or they haven't found a house yet. They're still looking for a house. So they want a lease back for up to 2 weeks to try to find a house. That's important to know. You know, or is it price? If it's just straight out price, we know that we've got to be aggressive when it comes to the seller's bottom line, because the listing agent told me the most important thing to them is price. So that kind of gives you kind of some framework that you can kind of, you know, have a discussion with your buyer about at the property. That makes you look intelligent, makes you look proactive, makes you look like a real professional. If you go to that property and you can already tell the buyer what the seller's thinking, right? Makes you look like a genius compared to, I don't know. I'll call. You know, how impressive is that? I mean, we're professionals, we're fiduciaries. We have the same responsibility as an attorney, accountant, or a certified financial planner. There's 3 fiduciaries in the world. We're one of 3. You know, we don't really get paid a commission. We get paid a professional fee. We call it a commission, which cheapens what we do. Attorneys charge a professional fee. Certified public accountants charge a professional fee. Why aren't we calling this a professional fee? We're professionals. We have a license. So start calling it a professional fee. My professional fee is 3%. Because I'm a professional.
Ken, so, and this is in the exclusive of the section 2.1, seller brokerage. So normally I charge, well, when I say I charge X amount %, right? But I also charge broker fee on top of it,
Transaction fee.
transaction fee,
Mhm.
yes. So that's still gonna be okay?
Yep, it's right there. Section 2.1, it's right there. Blank and blank. And that's why we did it that way, because a lot of agents do charge a transaction fee, or the brokerage charges a brokerage fee. Where I came from, Century 21 Everest, they charged a $299 transaction fee. If I didn't collect that $299, I had to pay it. Came out of my commission. So that's why we did it that way, is because a lot of brokerages have that. So it's dollars plus percentage. If you don't charge a transaction fee, then just put 0.00. And there's no dollars there. Good question. Okay. I think Craig talked a lot about the buyer broker agreement. When he was here, that's really the only form we really covered by him. But I just want to make sure, do we have any questions on the buyer broker? So it's here's the changes. I highlighted the changes. Anything that's new verbiage in this document is highlighted. So this does have an end date, and the end date is in section 1.1. So don't get confused. That's not when it starts as it was before. That's when it ends. So don't put today's date in 1/1, because your agreement will expire that day. That's the end date. Okay. Then you can do either a county or counties, or you can do a specific address. So you can do this agreement for a day. You can do it for a week. You can do it for 3 days. You have the flexibility based on what the buyer will sign as to how you structure this agreement. Okay.
I just wanna say something about this, please don't sign for 1 day or 2 days. I mean, it's just a waste of time. I think if I'm representing a buyer, it's because we already talked, we already agreed. I'm already spending gas, time, shopping. This is to start a transaction, and it's not like, let me show you one house, if you don't like me. It's not about that. So,
Well, I agree. If you've conveyed your value to them and they believe that you really can serve them, they won't have a problem signing a longer agreement or a broader agreement. But if you haven't conveyed that value to them, that they don't get your value, then they're not gonna wanna sign a long-term agreement with you. So there again, the value proposition is really important. If you really don't understand your value proposition, I have a document that I'll share with you. Just send me an email or come see me after. It's 189 things that a realtor does for their client. Pick your dozen, pick your 6 out of 189. And I think a lot of times we shortchange ourselves. We do a lot. Okay, this isn't brain surgery. We're not doctors. Somebody's not going to die on the operating table. It's not that serious, but we handle a lot of stuff if we do our job right. We bless people's lives with the most important financial decision that they ever make. We can either screw that up and it ends up being a financial disaster for them, or we can do it right and it ends up being a blessing in their life. So it's up to you, but you got to figure out how to convey your value proposition to them so that they are willing to sign a longer and a broader buyer and broker agreement with you, or a listing agreement. Okay?
Since I started Keller Williams 10 years ago, I haven't worked with other brokers. I learned it from day one, that if I represent a buyer, from that day one, I should have a buyer broker agreement. And the reason why I did that is because I understood the concept.
Yeah,
If I go and show a house, X house, and something happened there, I have liability.
yeah,
What are you doing here?
yeah.
What happened here? Oh, I'm sorry, who you are?
Yeah,
So there's a lot of liability. So for me to prevent that, that is why I explain my buyers, I need a buyer broker agreement to protect me and protect me.
you'd be surprised, Oscar, though, at how many agents don't get a buyer broker agreement until they write an offer. It's shocking. They work for free for days, weeks, months, and they don't get a buyer broker agreement signed until they actually write an offer. I know, I get the phone call every day. Ken, I worked with this client for 3 weeks and now they're working with somebody else and they've written an offer. You know, how can they do that? Marcia, what's the answer? Yeah, there you go. Should have signed an agreement with them. So yeah, it's more common than what you believe, but we can't do that anymore. So that's a good thing. We should be doing that anyway. We should be getting the buyer broker agreement day one.
Okay, I would like that document, certainly. In regard to 1, 2. County, cities or properties. Do we at that point on a single sheet of paper, write multiple counties or multiple properties?
Just list them right there. List them on that line.
In the line.
Davis, Weaver, not a separate piece of paper right
No,
there.
no, no,
You said a separate piece of paper.
but I didn't mean that, I'm sorry. The properties. Every single property is decided before we go.
I don't know. It's up to you.
Okay,
And do all of it.
It's up to you.
Because it's something do everywhere.
If they'll only
Just
sign,
one or just one
if
county.
they'll only sign for specific properties, then yes, you'll need to identify what those properties are that day that you're going to show them. And then you can amend this with an addendum and add more properties if you continue to show them properties. But if you're going the property route, then every address needs to show up there.
All the county.
Yeah, or the counties.
It's better, it's okay to do everywhere.
And then the other change, guys, is we do have the buyer disclose here in section 1.2, whether they have entered into another buyer broker agreement with someone or not. That's very attractive. That's very beneficial because they're testing legally that they're not in an agreement with someone else. Or if they are, what is the scope of that agreement? Is it for addresses? Did they sign a buyer broker agreement with someone else for addresses? Or did they sign a buyer broker agreement with somebody for counties? Because there's a big difference. If they sign for Weaver County and they want you to go show properties in Weaver County, we have a problem. Because you can't have double obligation to 2 agents. If they signed it for addresses, As long as those addresses aren't the same, then you're good, okay? So that's a real benefit to have that section put in there, okay?
So, Ken. So, Ken,
Yeah, go ahead.
we could have, there's a possibility that I could be representing a buyer here in Weaver County, and there could be another agent representing a buyer in Davis County.
Yes. Yep. It's county specific.
If you already have an existing buyer broker agreement signed client. Do they need to sign anything else with the changes?
Yes, great question. So yes, if you have a current buyer broker agreement and you are not under contract with that buyer as of the 13th of this month, you need to have them sign the new buyer broker addendum.
If you
That is a requirement.
Anything, right?
We want those signed by the 17th. So they are available on the MLS now. They were available as of Wednesday. So if you're not under contract by the 13th, when this goes into effect, we want you to have those addendums to your buyer broker agreement, right? And to your exclusive right to sales. There's an addendum to the exclusive right to sell as well. So
Okay, so
if you're not under,
Not a whole new buyer
Right.
broker
Yep.
agreement, just the.
Yep.
Unless we are already under.
if you're under contract, you're good. Okay. All right, so this is the new exclusive right to sell. I just want to point out the same thing. This is the ending address, ending date address. This is the ending date, not the beginning date. So this is opposite of the way that it's been before. So that is the end date. And then I want to make very clear, in our current agreement, the first item in section 2.1 is the total commission. And then 2.1B is what the buyer's getting paid. That's not the case. This is the gross commission. This is the listing agent. So you're taking care of you first. This is your compensation. Then this is the buyer's agent compensation. They are now separated. Okay, they are separated. Okay. And then section 0.2, basically is the seller is authorizing you, our brokerage, to pay the buyer's brokerage. So it's very specific language. And it also says that those are negotiable and the commission is not set. There's no such thing as a set fee for the commission. So that's a new addition to that document as well. Okay. Everything else is the same on that.
About the broker fee, the amount, who put that? The broker has the amount, or we can put the amount in. About the broker fee. It's by the broker?
That's up to you.
No, it's
Is it-
yourself.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
So that's on the listing agreement. So that's what is the seller willing to pay the buyer's broker. So this document is the same. We've just added this language. It's been highlighted. So this is the same as the document we've been using the last 5 years. It was called the brokerage commission addendum. So the last 5 years, we have been able to put commission in the REPC. Prior to the last 5 years, you could not put commission in the REPC. It was an ethics violation, okay? I owned a brokerage for 12 years. We had one ethics violation in those 12 years, no lawsuits. But we did have one ethics violation because my agent put commission in the REPC before we had this document, and you could not do it. That's an ethics violation. And the reason why he did that is because the property wasn't listed yet. And he wanted to establish the commission. We didn't have these forms. So what was he to do? Put it in the REPC. We had a ethics violation. It was all okay, but they did that 5 years ago to where you could say, okay, seller, buyer wants you to pay blank percentage or blank dollars of their buyer's commission obligation. This is the same form, but we've added this language. It says payment shall be made in addition to any compensation that's been agreed to by the brokerage. So if he sends over his commission agreement and it's short of what you have in your buyer broker agreement. So let's say they send over their commission agreement for 2%, and your buyer broker agreement is 3%, then you put 1% in this document and send this over as an addendum to the contract. This is how you ask for more money.
To the seller.
Mhm. Okay,
What happened if you? I noticed the one construction, they offer 4%. You need to do this. If you put in the buyer broker agreement 3%, the other percent you need to put.
it depends on whether the builder uses their own contract or whether they use the rep C. If they use the rep C, then yes, you'll need to address that in the rep C, but a lot of builders have their own contract. And in their own contract, there's an agency section that talks about who represents the builder, who represents the buyer, and how much they're being paid. So just ask, hey, are you using your own contract? And in that contract, is there an agency section that talks about I'm representing the buyer and how much I'm being compensated? And if they're using their own contract, that's typically the way it is. But if they use the state form, then you're going to need to address that. Yeah. So you could put 4% in section 4.3 of the contract and just have them accept it that way.
Yeah, usually they have in their own contract.
Yeah, it's their own
To be
contract.
clear about that.
Yeah. Okay, any questions on this form? This is pretty straightforward because we've been using that for 5 years. So this form right here, the compensation agreement, this form replaces the commission escrow instructions. Okay, so this is the form that we've been talking about, that currently the way that most of the brokerages within Keller Williams are saying that this should be handled is that this should be filled out at the time that the exclusive right to sell is filled out and signed by the seller, designating how much they're willing to pay a cooperating broker. Okay.
It just makes sense.
Yeah,
And Ken, this is the paper that they're gonna ask us for, like the.
you're the listing agent. Yeah, they're gonna say, hey, can you send me your compensation agreement? Okay.
Or
And
that's what
then-
you requested for the buyers.
Yes. And this is signed by, and you can see here, it's signed by all parties. It's signed by the buyer, it's signed by the seller, it's signed by the listing agent, and it's signed by the buyer's agent. So that's what makes this a legally binding document, is that it's signed by all 4 parties. So that's why this is etched in concrete right now. They're talking about doing an addendum, so this document can be modified, but that doesn't exist currently. I'm still of the opinion, personally, that I'm going to have this prepared with my ERS, but I'm not going to automatically share it with everybody who calls and says they're showing the property or is preparing me an offer. I'm just going to say, yes, they're offering compensation. If they ask, I'll tell them what they're offering, but I don't like the idea of this being a higher amount than what is in the buyer broker agreement. And I think that exposes your seller a little bit to that additional money. I might be wrong. Maybe Sean has a different opinion on that, but that's how I.
So in the event that happened and it was only 2.5% and the seller was willing to pay 3%.
Yeah.
You have that 0.5% that was in there and it's all signed and they're agreed to pay that. Can they give that out as a concession on something else? And
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that I think a savvy buyer's agent is gonna say to the buyer, hey, our agreement is only for 2.5. The seller's willing to pay 3. Obviously, there's a 0.5% there that they already gave away. Let's add that to the concessions. Let's add, say it was a $400,000 house. Let's add $2,000 to our concessions, or let's lower the price by $2,000. They've already spent that money. They've offered it. Let's use it somewhere else. They're not gonna say that to you.
so it could either be for repairs or it could
Yeah.
be lower the price of the
Yeah.
house.
I think that's what's gonna happen personally. I hope not. That's not the way it's intended.
No, son, it's
But-
like you costume, you will need to.
Anybody have a differing opinion on that?
Well, I think going the opposite way, right? I think you're gonna have agents that don't have their. I don't know, I'm not gonna say that, but I think that you have,
Say what you're thinking. This is a
no.
safe This is a safe space. I've told you everything I believe today, and it might be crap, but I've told you.
that for your client, they're gonna turn around and be like, well, that just gives me more. Can they do that? Okay, they used to be able to do
can't.
that, correct, but you didn't.
You cannot be
specify.
compensated higher than your buyer broker.
What if you addend your buyer broker agreement?
That's poor form.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's even
good.
allowed.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
could an agent?
You can go down, but you can't go up. That's the way it's written. You can't receive more than what your buyer broker agreement was written.
Okay, if the buyer is.
But they're gonna use it somewhere. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
And there might be agents who try to raise their commission. I don't know. We'll see everything, right?
Appreciate that.
Well, I don't think the DOJ is gonna appreciate that, nor is the Attorney General gonna appreciate that, because that goes against the spirit of this law. The spirit of this law is you get compensated based on what your worth is. You've told your client your worth is 2% or 2.5%. That's your worth. To change that after the fact, that's why we're in this whole mess anyway. It's because it was fluid. Now they're saying, hey, it can't be fluid. It's either X or it's Y.
I just gotta say that our agent that they just work 1%. Because when you do more, run your file, and bring a lot of values. It's not sometimes fair to pay the same 3% to other agents that
Yeah.
doing anything, even not responding text.
Exactly. Well, they're a discount broker, and you understand that using a discount broker, you're gonna get limited services. It's actually called, we used to have it, it's called a limited services agreement that basically said, hey, public, beware, you're paying less in commission and you're getting less services. So as long as you understand that you're not gonna get full representation, paying 1%, then it's okay. But the problem is people not telling people that they're a limited services brokerage or a limited services agent and only charging that amount. And the client still feels like they're in a full service relationship. When there's that split between the limited and the full service is when we have problems. That's when the public doesn't trust us. That's when we get a bad reputation, like used car sales. So make sure that you specify your value, there again, your value, and tell people what you're gonna do for them. I've got 200 things on a piece of paper that you can itemize for them as to what we do for them. Okay. So, all right, let's see, how are we doing on time?
One more thing, for the.
We're out of time, but I'll stick around as long as you guys have questions and we're being productive. If you feel like you need to leave, feel free to leave, but we'll stay here for at least another 30 minutes or so and answer your questions.
For be clear on that, if is the buyer going to pay the 1.5%, I need to fill out the cost, or it's just the commission fee on the
What form are you
closing
talking
cost?
about? This form?
No, if my buyer broker agreement is 3%,
3%, okay,
and the seller going to pay 2.5,
okay,
and my buyer, he's agreed to pay the other.
0.5%.
Just we need to put it, if you request a closing, they giving me the concession, I can take it from there, the 0.5%.
As long as there's enough money. Yeah.
And we need to sign up other addendum, or just we can
No.
do like the commission. fee, just
Title company will do that
Okay.
because they see the contract.
We can continue to that.
They see that in section 4.3, the seller's paying 1.5%, you're at 2.5%. So the title company sees that there's a 1% difference. You send over your buyer broker agreement to the title company. They see the disparity and that gets put on the closing statement for the buyer as a closing cost.
Like, okay. we can
There's
continue
no
what we're
addendum.
saying, it's not change, okay, that's fine.
No,
Yeah.
there's already an agreement
Yeah.
for that in your buyer broker agreement.
Thank you.
Anything else, Wes?
So if you're, say you're seller, you call the seller, you're representing the buyer, call the seller, and the seller says, I'm not offering any commission at all. Okay, and your buyer still wants that, and you've got an agreement with 3%. And so in the rep C, in the offer, you put that 3%, would you do that?
Not if the seller said they're not offering any compensation. You could test the waters and, because the totality of the offer is the offering price, the
So-
concessions. Maybe you're not asking for any concessions.
Right, so if your offer is really amazing and you're like saying, okay, my client wants this house
Yeah.
and I'm going to ask you for that 3%.
Yeah.
And we've given you an amazing offer.
Yeah, and I would call the listing agent and tell them that, hey, I know you told me your seller's not offering any compensation. But hey, our offer is X as far as the price goes. We're not asking for any concessions. I did this the other day. I represented a buyer on a $600,000 house. We asked for 0 concessions. We gave them their listing price. He was not offering a commission, but I got a 3% commission because they wanted the house. And so I knew that the average person is probably going to ask for 15 or 20K in concessions. So I just asked for them to pay a buyer's agent commission instead, and it all worked out.
Okay.
Yeah,
And the
that's
listing
my
price
question.
was the same.
what's that?
The listing price was the same.
Yeah, we gave them their listing
You're
price.
just asking for the commission.
Mhm.
Okay.
You didn't ask for anything else.
We didn't
you
ask
just
for any
That's for the
concessions.
commission.
I could have wrote it as concessions, but I wanted to write it as commission because I wanted them to know that I was gonna get paid. Didn't matter, it was dollar for dollar, it would be the same, but I treated
But
it
there's
as
transparency in what you just. did.
transparency. And then my buyer couldn't say, oh gosh, thanks for getting me that 20K.
I know.
That's awesome.
Negotiating with the official.
Yeah,
Kind of.
That's funny.
We can negotiate the commission. Do you pay commission?
Yeah.
Yes, how much? This amount. Oh, you go more. Let's negotiate that.
yeah,
So.
yeah, it is. It's very much like a FISBO, right?
So at this point, this is the only thing that's gonna be different on the Rep C is what you
Yes.
shared with us.
Yes. Now, that hasn't been approved yet by the Attorney General's office. So the final version of what that says is still pending. But that's what's been approved by the Forms Committee. That's what's been approved by the UAR. And so now we're just waiting for the Attorney General's office to sign off on it. Very honestly, I think what's happening is the Attorney General's office is holding that document for as long as they possibly can. Because they're watching what's happening out in the country. Because other states have already had this go into effect. Some went into effect on August 1st. Some went into effect on July 15th. So some states have already been doing this for a month. So the DOJ has been watching what they've been doing in other states, and they've been opining or commenting on what tactics agents are taking, brokerages are taking in order to address this issue.
They testing right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the DOJ has come back and said, no, we're not gonna accept that, stop doing that. Or yes, you can do that, but with this condition. And so this is still being massaged. I really think that between now and the end of the year, there's still gonna be changes. We're gonna be having this kind of discussion weekly with you guys in this kind of format. Because there's gonna be a lot of changes. The best practice is gonna change as the DOJ manages this thing, and this settlement is not actually official. It's not gonna be official till November. So, we're giving you what we need today and our opinions based on today. Like I said, when Sean comes back, and we have a chance to sit down, we'll get with you guys with best practices. But I do believe that the best practice is doing the compensation agreement, full disclosure, full honesty, communication. Communicate. And that is going to be hard for agents because we've relied a lot on text messages. We've relied a lot on showing time and a line to communicate things to each other. The question has come up repeatedly. Well, I'm just going to put my commission in a line. When you call me, when you send me a showing request, I can email you back. I can direct message you and say, hey, the super box is on the front railing. And by the way, I'm paying a 3% buyer's agent commission. No, that is not okay. Because a line is owned by the MLS. A line is an extension of the MLS. So that's not, can't do that. But that's how a lot of agents have felt like they're gonna communicate.
Communicate it. So that's the addendum that we need to give to the buyer broker. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, it's already.
And all it does is say, hey, commissions are negotiable, they're not set.
Okay, just clarifying.
Yeah, it's just reiterating that.
Kip, I have a question, yeah, I don't want to disclose this right away, like you mentioned, my seller is offering 3%, but the buyer broker is 2.5, so I don't want to disclose this right away.
That's why I would say to the buyer's agent, when they call and ask for a compensation, I'd say, yes, my seller's offering compensation. Put your buyer broker compensation in the REPSI in section 4.3,
But will I have to eventually send this to the buyer?
if they ask for it.
If they don't ask, I don't have to send it?
No, there's no requirement for you to send it. That's how I'm gonna choose to do it. I'm gonna kind of modify that a little bit. I'm not gonna send it on the front end. I'm gonna kind of send it after we're dancing with each other. Once we're in an offer situation,
We say that again, but your compensation. Buyer broker.
put your agreed upon buyer broker compensation in section 4.3 of the REPS. Done. They shouldn't care. That they shouldn't care if my client's offering more than their buyer broker agreement. They can't get it anyway. So that's a gift for you to say to the buyer's agent, put your agreed upon buyer broker compensation in section 4.3, and I'll present it to the seller. Yes, we're offering compensation. All he can expect of you is to pay what's in his buyer broker agreement. Okay. Now, if that's less, if your seller is offering less than what they put in 4.3, which is in their buyer broker agreement, then you just simply do a counter offer in the REPSI. You just counter that, saying that the commission listed in section 4.3 of the contract is going to be 2.5%, or whatever your seller has agreed to pay. Okay, just becomes a offer counter offer situation. Does that make sense? Anybody feeling better about it today than they did?
A
No.
little bit, but. Okay, what I'm concerned about is that if I don't offer this form, somewhere along the line, they may ask for it, and they see that, oh, this feller's offering 3, but I don't, well, my buyer broker is 2.5, it's gonna have to fit. It might just,
Doesn't matter. They couldn't have the 3 anyway.
Mhm.
They can't get more than what's in their buyer broker agreement.
but then they could talk about concessions.
Yeah, they could. Yeah, if they ask you for it, send it over. I'm not gonna, the best practice that a lot of brokerages is talking about is to send it automatically. Anybody that inquires, send it automatically about compensation. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna tell them we're offering compensation, put their agreed upon amount in section 4.3. If they press me for that, then yeah, I'm gonna send it to them. I'm not gonna be unreasonable. I have nothing to hide. I just don't like the fact that the amount in that agreement might be more than their buyer broker agreement, and I think that leaves my seller exposed for the difference. That's what I don't like. You know, some people would argue, well, you know, they shouldn't do that. I mean, commission's commission and all that others, you know, negotiable, but let's face it. If they think there's a 0.5% out there to be had, or 1%, they're gonna ask for it. I think I would. I'm just telling you what I would do. If I'm a buyer's agent and I think the seller's offer to give X and I'm at Y, I'm gonna figure out a way to get to X. Can't come to me because my commission's set. But would my buyer be happy that I got him another $2,000 in concessions, or we whacked $2,000 off the purchase price? They'd think I was a hero.
It's just another avenue for you to shine.
Yeah, I mean. And if they came back and countered and said, no, we're not gonna do that, then at least you tried. I don't think I would ever use the argument, well, I don't know why you wouldn't pay it. You were gonna pay that in commission anyway. I would never say that. That's just bad form. Anything else? We good? Everybody good? Ready to start this?
Thanks, Ken.
It's gonna be fine, guys. It's
I think if anything,
Where you
it's,
can still be more
that's where,
proficient,
yes,
it's like it's done in
and it's
the- better.
defined,
Yep.
once it's set. There's
It's
no
set.
question about the commission,
Yeah.
it's all the other negotiation on everything
Yeah.
else.
And that's the positive side of using this form. I don't want to be a naysayer on this form. I don't want you to think I think this is an absolutely horrible form. Because the upside is just what Wes said. When your seller signs that form and you sign that form, that commission is set. That's what the commission's gonna be. That's a good thing. In the past, with it being on the MLS, I almost look at it as that's a suggested or that's an offered compensation. But the fact that it's on the MLS, how many times have you negotiated a commission that's on the MLS? I do it almost every time I write an offer. I'm addressing the commission in one way or another. Now you can't. This is in concrete. Today, they're talking about doing an addendum to this form, which it could be changed. But that's the good side is that you don't have to worry. You're guaranteed to get that amount. That's the good side of it. So just like with anything else, there's good and bad. But
Yeah,
I think for realtors, that's a good thing.
we can do more professional and so, so.
Yeah.
More the value for us.
Yeah.
And people
Yeah,
feel happy
Thanks
with
for
us.
coming.
How we say, when you say, hey, I get 15,000 calls, and you say, oh my God. what did you see?" And like,
Yeah.
then you can do whatever, so, be clear. Be honest, be all like, it's good when you negotiate and more.
Yeah.
The money, and they say, oh my God, you really nice people." I think you will do better.
The way you need to look at it is that the sales price is a pool of money. And how's that money gonna be divvied up? Some of it's gonna go to the seller, some of it's gonna go back to the buyer in concession, some of it's gonna go to the listing agent, some of it's gonna go to the buyer's agent. That pool of money, is gonna be divided up, and you have say in part how that money is gonna be divided up when it comes to your side of the transaction. A broker yesterday on our broker call gave a pretty good example of explaining how commission works to a buyer. His thing is if somebody asks me a question about compensation, hey, and he's up in Park City. So the average price of a house in Park City today is $3 million. So that's a $90,000 commission at 3%. And so, his thing is if somebody questions me about commission, I say, look, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. Let me explain to you how this really works. So out of that $90,000, a third of it goes to my broker. So he gets a third of it. A third of it is I have to pay expenses, licensing, advertising, all those things relative to my business. So a third of that gets plowed back into my business. And a third of that, which is 30,000, I get to keep to support my family, feed my family and put a roof over their head. If you're asking me for a concession, how much of that food that's going into my kid's mouth do you want? That's really how it works. I have to pay the broker. I have to fund my business. So the only part of that commission that's optional for me is what I keep and how I use that money and how much of that do you want?
That's a good way of approaching it.
And if somebody says, they want some of that money, they're basically saying, I want to take that money out of your kid's mouth. Or your house payment or whatever. So that kind of puts them in a difficult situation because now it becomes personal. You're coming after my money that I feed my children and put a roof over their head with, or whatever you do with that money, right? Pay your living expenses. So I thought that was good.
I just show you this really fast, as long as I have, like, Perry Home did right. And sign it with the 3%, I'm okay, right?
Yeah.
Don't need to meet any next.
It's in the contract.
Don't want me, okay.
No, that's the nice thing about a builder is they put it right in the contract for you.
Okay,
Yeah, they don't have to worry about the MLS or any of that stuff.
they make it easy.
Yep. Hey, guys, thanks for being here.
Thank you for your time.
You guys are awesome.
So if you can send me the list, they will say they want it and
Yeah.
and we can.
Yeah, you bet.
Feel.
I would love to get that 200.
Will do.
If you wanna go back and watch this, where is it posted, or do we have to have somebody send it to us?
Looks like it was recorded, which is scary.